Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 400 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How about you?
I'm great.
You are great.
But I cannot believe we have reached episode 400.
It's amazing.
It is. It really is. Let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. We had Patterson Jane.
Hey, Jane.
Allison.
What's going on, Allison?
Travis Cunningham.
Hey, thanks, Cunningham.
Donna.
Good old Donna.
Jackie Stewart.
There's Stewart.
Trinell Evans.
Thanks, Evans.
Marky Mark D.
Marky D.
Mrs. G.
I can't be wrong with a Mrs. G.
Colleen Mills.
What's going on, Mills?
Karen Smith.
Hey, Smith.
And Andrea Ginta.
Ginta.
So we appreciate the new support. And then if we go back into the vault, this week we selected Erica Lilly.
Well, thanks, Ms. Lilly.
Yeah, thank you for all the support. So Gibbs, we're getting into this unsolved episode 400, but we also have an episode out on True Crime All the Time right now where we're talking about another pretty big case, the White House Farm murders. This goes back to 1985 in Essex, England, where an entire family was murdered.
I know I say this a lot, but it really is a really good case.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, authorities initially thought it was a murder-suicide, but suspicions soon turned on this one surviving family member. All right, Gibbs, are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I am.
We went back and forth on what would be the best to cover for 400, and we ultimately settled on Zodiac. You know, my fascination with Zodiac goes back many, many years. And it is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting unsolved cases.
It really is.
And I'm so excited for this episode that I decided to wear my Zodiac watch.
I know you did.
Today, while we are recording.
I don't have one, so I just wore this Sagittarius thing. I'm not even Sagittarius, but I was trying to find something that kind of, went along with the theme.
That would go along with it.
Yeah.
So the Zodiac is a serial killer definitively linked to 5 murders and 2 attempted murders in the San Francisco Bay Area. The killer referred to himself as the Zodiac in multiple letters sent to the press, one of which said, "I like killing people because it's so much fun." And there are a lot of reasons why this case has had the staying power that it has, right? You've had a lot of books written about the Zodiac. You had the movie, which I enjoyed. It was a good movie. Had some big stars in it. But really, when you think about the communications from the killer to the police, the ciphers, there's just so much to this case that draws people in and kind of keeps them there.
It's like a mystery inside of a mystery.
Wrapped up inside an enigma.
Yes.
And we're going to get into all of it. The Zodiac claimed to have murdered 37 victims. There are multiple attacks that are tentatively linked to the Zodiac. Thousands of suspects have been considered, but decades later, the identity of this infamous killer remains unknown. So in part 1 of the Zodiac Killer episodes, we'll cover a timeline of known and suspected attacks and the first letters and ciphers sent to the press. And it's such a big case that, it's going to take us 3 episodes. We could have gone longer, but 3 episodes is what we settled on.
We did.
Now, one of the earliest suspected Zodiac murders occurred on June 4th, 1963, when 2 students were shot in Santa Barbara County. 18-year-old Robert Domingos and his fiancée, 17-year-old Linda Faye Edwards, were seniors at Lompoc High School. They decided to participate in Senior Ditch Day and go to a beach near Gaviota State Park.
I love Senior Ditch Day.
I do remember we had one as well.
I did it every year until I graduated.
So you were a senior, 3 times or 4 times? I can't remember. Either way, that was a lot of Senior Ditch Days.
I am not saying. No. Remember, I graduated early.
Yeah, sure. But they never returned. And their parents reported them missing on June 5th. Robert's father went to the beach the following day and found the bodies lying together inside a crumbling shack. So we talk about it all the time, but how awful would that be for a father or a mother to find their missing child dead? Bad enough to learn
Right.
that they were missing and that they ultimately died, but to find them yourself, horrible.
The devastation you would feel.
Robert and Linda had been bound with rope and shot with a .22 caliber weapon. Robert was shot 11 times and Linda was shot 9 times. The killer dragged the bodies to the shack and attempted to burn it down, but was unsuccessful. The killer used Winchester Western Super X ammunition, the same type used during a 1968 double murder committed by the Zodiac. So, we're talking about a couple of murders suspected to be the Zodiac, but there are reasons why people suspect that or attribute the murders to him. The bindings of the victims was also similar to a 1969 confirmed Zodiac case, but it wasn't until 1972 that Santa Barbara County announced a possible Zodiac connection. Santa Barbara County Sheriff John Carpenter said about the Domingos and Edwards murders, there now appears to be a high degree of probability that the Zodiac Killer committed the murders, although the anticipated response to this statement would be one of skepticism. Let me say that we do not make this assertion frivolously.
Easy for you to say.
No, it's actually not. I mess up that word frequently, but I understand what he's saying. It took us a while to come out and make this connection. And he's saying, yeah, a lot of people were going to be skeptical about it, but without going into detail, he's saying we're not making this frivolously. So that means they've got some things behind the scenes that make them pretty confident. The next unconfirmed Zodiac murder occurred in Riverside, California. 18-year-old Sherry Josephine Bates lived with her father and was a student at Riverside City College. On October 30th, 1966, Sherry Jo left a note for her dad that said, "Dad went to the RCC library." The following morning, Sherry Jo's Volkswagen Beetle was found abandoned in the library parking lot. Her body was found nearby, between 2 houses slated for demolition. Sherry Jo had been stabbed multiple times, and her throat was cut. Hairs were found in the dried blood in her hands.
Kind of eerie.
Well, it's obviously a very nasty crime scene, a heinous murder, but these hairs, if you're the police, you got to feel pretty good about that, okay, maybe she fought her attacker. These hairs came from her attacker. Now, the problem is in the 1960s, how much could they really do with hair?
Not much.
It turned out that the wires in Sherry Jo's distributor cap were pulled out. Also, her purse was still intact. So there's a couple of things there. Kind of rules out robbery, right? Her purse is there. Doesn't seem to be anything missing. But this idea of disabling someone's car is a very interesting one. Could it be that somebody came up and said, "Hey, are you having trouble with your car? She can't get it started. I'll pop the hood for you. Let's take a look at it." And that gave the perpetrator the perfect moment to strike.
Yeah, an opportunity.
A paint-splattered men's Timex watch with a torn wristband was found nearby. The watch stopped at 12:24 a.m. Additionally, police found a military-style boot print at the crime scene.
And that might lead the police to believe that it could be somebody in the military.
And I don't know what you make of, this paint-splattered watch. Okay, maybe it's a painter who just happens to wear military-style boots. There was no evidence Sherry Jo was sexually assaulted. On November 29th, 1966, nearly identical typewritten letters were mailed to the Riverside Police and the Riverside Press Enterprise. They were titled The Confession. The author took responsibility for the murder and provided details that were not public knowledge. The letter read, "She was young and beautiful, but now she is battered and dead. She's not the first, and she will not be the last. I lay awake nights thinking about my next victim. Maybe she will be the beautiful blonde that babysits near the little store and walks down the dark alley each evening about 7, or maybe she will be the shapely blue-eyed brunette that said no when I asked her for a date in high school. Maybe it will not be either, but I shall cut off her female parts and deposit them for the whole city to see. So don't make it too easy for me. Keep your sisters, daughters, and wives off the streets and alleys." Miss Bates was stupid. She went to the slaughter like a lamb. She didn't put up a struggle, but I did. It was a ball. I first pulled the middle wire from the distributor, then I waited for her in the library and followed her out after about 2 minutes. The battery must have been about dead by then. I then offered to help. She was then very willing to talk with me. I told her that my car was down the street and I would give her a lift home when we were away from the library walking. I said it was about time. She asked me, about time for what? I said it was about time for her to die. I grabbed her around the neck with my hand over her mouth and my other hand with a small knife at her throat. She went very willingly. Her breast felt very warm and firm under my hands, but only one thing was on my mind: making her pay for the brush-offs that she had given me during the years prior. She died hard. She squirmed and shook as I choked her, and her lips twitched. She let out a screech, and I kicked her head to shut her up. I plunged the knife into her, and it broke. I then finished the job by cutting her throat. I'm not sick, I am insane, but that will not stop the game. This letter should be published for all to read it. It just might save that girl in the alley, but that's up to you. It will be on your conscience, not mine. Yes, I did make that call to you also. It was just a warning. Beware. I am stalking your girls now. Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the hallmarks of the Zodiac case, the letters, the ciphers. Let's take this one. It's pretty darn scary when someone takes responsibility for the brutal murder of a young woman and talks about it so openly, so candidly, and almost revels in it.
I mean, makes you feel like she deserved what she got.
Well, according to him, she did.
Yeah.
She brushed him off in years prior, right? He said that. But then, there's also this foreboding nature of who's going to be my next victim, right? It could be anybody. It could be your wife. It could be the girl walking down the alley. That is scary stuff. And we'll see it more in some of the later letters. This is very early on. This is not the Zodiac speaking, right? This is before the Zodiac is even a known commodity.
Well, you hear this, you would think you'd want to lock up your kids, your wife, not let anybody out of the house.
No, because it's scary stuff. In December 1966, a poem was found carved into the bottom of a desk in the RCC library titled "Sick of Living, Unwilling to Die." Some believe the language of the poem resembles future Zodiac letters. It said, "Cut, clean, if read, clean, blood spurting, dripping, spilling, all over her new dress. Oh well, it was read anyway. Life draining into an uncertain death. She won't die this time. Someone find her, just wait till next time." It looks like the letters RH are signed at the bottom of the poem. Again, scary stuff. Now you could say this is someone messing around, a macabre poem. But when a young girl has been murdered, essentially the month before this is found, it takes on a very, very dark meaning, a dark tone.
Sure. Yeah.
Almost as if this has to be the killer, right? Writing this. Months later, in April 1967, the Riverside Press Enterprise, the police and Sherry Joe's father, Joseph Bates, received almost identical handwritten letters that said, Bates had to die, there will be more. The notes were signed with a symbol that resembles a Z. So we talked about, a father finding his daughter dead, and that would be horrible. Obviously, Joseph Bates went through his own grief, his own tragedy, when he found out that his daughter, Sherry Joe, had been murdered. But then he receives a handwritten letter that said his daughter had to die.
I just would want to get my hands on this guy.
And I'm sure he did already, right? But you have to think he's working through the grief. Now, all of a sudden, he gets this, almost as if, the killer is taunting him. Is it reopening wounds that are still fresh?
Yeah.
In 1969, the Riverside police contacted investigators in Northern California about the similarities between the Zodiac murders and the murder of Sherry Joe Bates. California Department of Justice documents examiner Sherwood Morrill concluded the Zodiac was responsible for the notes in the Bates case. So, we're jumping around here in time, but you almost have to tell this story, because the Sherry Joe Bates murder happened so early on. It wasn't until years later that it was kind of connected with the Zodiac murders. And this Sherwood Morrill's a big part of the Zodiac case. Now, he's played by that really great character actor in the movie The Zodiac, who also happened to play the library inspector who goes after Jerry for the very, very old book. What is it? Yeah. Capricorn or whatever, right, that he supposedly never returned. The Riverside connection was revealed by San Francisco Chronicle reporter Paul Avery. And Paul Avery, big part of this case as well. I thought played very well in the movie by none other than Robert Downey Jr. I will say, that movie is based on the Robert Graysmith books, and we'll talk about Robert Graysmith, I'm sure, as we go through this case. But the one thing you have to say is that the casting was very good.
It was good
in that movie. The Zodiac then sent a letter to the LA Times on March 13th, 1971, confirming the theory that he killed Sherry Joe Bates, writing, "I do have to give them credit for stumbling across my Riverside activity, but they're only finding the easy ones. There are a hell of a lot more down there."
More taunting.
Taunting for sure, but also scary in the fact that he's saying, okay, you found this one, but there's a whole bunch of other people I killed that you didn't find. Now, that's the thing with Zodiac, right? He made claims that could be verified, but he also made claims, a whole bunch of claims that couldn't be. And years later, the Riverside police would reject the Zodiac connection and focus in on a sworn lover of Sherry Joe Bates. Is it possible that the Zodiac, learning about this, decided, well, I'm going to take credit for it? Yeah, it's possible.
Sure. Builds more credibility for him if he can make people believe it.
Yes, but is it also possible that this is some of his early work?
It is.
And I would say absolutely so. And a lot of that hinges on, the skill and the veracity of Sherwood Morrill, which does come into question. In the late 90s, the police obtained a sample of the suspect's DNA to compare with the DNA from the hairs found on Sherry Joe's hand. Unfortunately, the DNA wasn't a match, and the suspect denied any involvement in the murder. So we talked about it, right? They found these hairs. They assumed that the hairs came from whoever killed her.
Right.
In the 1960s, there was nothing they could do with these hairs, really. But in the late 90s, DNA was becoming more and more viable. So what does that mean? The hairs do not match the suspect they had. Does that lend credence that it most likely was Zodiac?
Well, it's got to push you that way more.
Yeah. The first confirmed Zodiac attack occurred in Benicia on December 20th, 1968. 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and 17-year-old David Faraday had only known each other for 2 weeks and were going out on their first date. David met Betty's parents around 8 p.m. and promised to have her home by 11. They stopped at a friend's house and went to a holiday concert at Betty's school. Afterwards, David drove to a secluded lover's lane near a pumping station on Lake Herman Road.
Those lover's lanes.
I know, just think about all the times you were secluded and vulnerable. I think you're lucky that nothing ever happened to you. Because from what I understand, you were called at one point the king of the lover's lanes.
I think everybody had some type of lover's lane. I think.
I don't know if the small town I lived in did. It wasn't big enough to have its own lover's lane. We had to go to a neighboring city.
Oh, hey, excuse me.
We're going to use your lover's lane?
Yeah.
Witness Stella Medeiros left her home on Lake Herman Road at 11:10 p.m. to pick up her 13-year-old son at the movies in Benicia. About 5 minutes into her drive, she saw 2 bodies on the side of the road. She continued driving into Benicia to get help, flashing her lights at the first police car she saw. Officers found David's body next to the car. He had been shot in the head. He was still breathing, but was in critical condition. He died before he got to the hospital. Betty was found 28 feet from the rear of the car. She had been shot 5 times in the back and twice from the front. A bullet was removed from her clothing. 1 round was shot through the rear of the station wagon, which investigators think was a warning shot to get the teens out of the car. Shell casings found at the scene were identified as Winchester Western Super X. And as we've already talked about, right, this was the same type of ammo used in the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. Now, there's a lot of different types of ammo out there. The same type of ammo doesn't conclusively mean the same killer. Could have just been that's the type that each killer chose.
Sure. But every time I hear about these cases, right, I mean, it's a case that I know you know very well, and I've heard of the case and read some of the case and all that. But every time, it still shocks me.
What shocks you?
How the murder happened and what those people must have felt like at that time.
I get that. And I think that's a good thing because you and I talk about murder a lot. We have for 8 years. So the fact that it does still shock you is probably a good thing. It means you're not desensitized to it all. And, I'm kind of the same way. I've still, as much as we've tried, not been able to understand how somebody reaches that decision that they want to kill or maybe even need to kill, feels the need to kill another human being. Like you want to end this person's life. You want to take them away from their family, from their loved ones. I've never been able to understand it.
Yeah, the drive behind that.
But it's also, I think, what fascinates a lot of us about the world of true crime. How and why do these people do what they do? How are they capable of it? Now, ballistic evidence indicated the killer used a .22 caliber gun, possibly a J.C. Higgins Model 80 semi-automatic pistol. The police didn't think a serial killer was responsible for the murders at this time, which makes sense. Early on, I don't think the authorities naturally kind of jump to the conclusion that they have a serial killer on their hands. And most of the time, you don't have a serial killer. You have a jealous husband. You have someone who's upset with the victim. You have someone who's out to get money, right? These are the motives for a lot of the murders that occur. Serial killers are out there, but they don't make up the bulk of the murders committed around the world. Betty Lou Jensen's best friend told SF Weekly all the detectives thought it had to be because of drugs. They refused to hear anything else. Betty Lou was an honor student and David was an Eagle Scout. Neither victim was involved in drug use or criminal activity. So it does seem a little strange for the police to kind of very quickly go to, well, this must be drugs. The police followed up on a few leads, including a jealous ex-boyfriend and a pair of men with guns spotted at the pump station that night. These men claimed they were out hunting raccoons. There was also a report about a pair of men in a blue sedan who chased a teen couple down Lake Herman Road 90 minutes before the shooting. Investigators never ID'd the blue sedan or a white Impala seen earlier that night. So by all indications, right, these weren't bad kids. They weren't into drugs. They were, doing what kids do, trying to find a place to be alone and, maybe hold hands, maybe do a little smoochy or
just have a little bit of fun.
Have some fun. But think about how scary this would be. Back then they probably called it necking, which I never did understand what the word necking actually meant.
Oh, yeah, maybe just because you're kissing the neck sometimes. I don't know.
To me, necking is like picturing your neck on somebody else's neck.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, what fun is that? That doesn't seem to make sense at all. But, you're alone. You're with somebody you ostensibly like. And all of a sudden, shots are ringing out. You're being hit. And, I can't help but think about Betty. She's found 28 feet from the rear of the car.
Yeah.
Did she make it that far?
Maybe.
It's pretty horrible. The second confirmed Zodiac attack took place months later. 22-year-old Darlene Farron was a wife, mother, and waitress at Terry's restaurant in Vallejo. On July 4th, 1969, Darlene picked up her friend, 19-year-old Michael Majot, about an hour before midnight. They were going to get something to eat when Darlene said she wanted to talk about something. Mike suggested she turn around and they headed to the Blue Rock Springs Park, a popular spot for teens to hang out. Darlene parked and turned off the headlights but left the radio playing. A few minutes later, 3 cars with young drivers pulled into the parking lot. They laughed, yelled, and threw firecrackers before driving off.
Those darn kids.
And I would have got away with it if it wasn't for those pesky kids.
That's right.
Mike and Darlene were alone until midnight. Around then, another vehicle pulled into the parking lot, most likely a brown Ford Mustang or Chevy Corvair. The driver turned off the headlights and pulled up next to Darlene. Mike asked Darlene if she knew the driver. She said, per crime library, "Oh, never mind." And it's interesting. It's something that we'll have to talk about because it does make it seem as though Darlene Farron knew who this person was.
Yeah.
Because if not, most likely you would say, no, I have no idea who this is.
Yeah. Why would you say, oh, never mind?
Oh, never mind. Don't worry about him. Anything like that suggests that you know who it is, but there's nothing to be alarmed about.
Yeah, he's harmless.
The driver then pulled out of the parking lot and drove off, only to return 5 minutes later, parking behind and to the right of the couple. With the headlights still on, the driver got out of the vehicle. He shined a bright flashlight. As he approached the driver's side, Mike thought he was a police officer and reached for his ID. That was when the man raised a gun and shot at Mike. Mike was able to kick his way into the back seat and was shot while doing so. The killer then turned the gun on Darlene. The man was walking back to his car when Mike began yelling. He returned to the car, fired 2 more shots, and left. And this is, to me, an interesting detail. It makes it seem as if the killer thought Mike was dead.
Right.
and only walked back because he heard Mike yelling and realized that he hadn't killed him. So he fired 2 more shots. Mike, though, was able to turn on the car's blinkers. He opened the door and fell to the pavement. He saw the attacker driving back towards Vallejo. Around 12:40 a.m., a man called the Vallejo Police Department from a gas station phone and claimed responsibility for the shooting and the murders on Lake Herman Road. The caller spoke in a low, monotone voice and said, "I want to report a murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye."
Eerie.
Very eerie. Number one, he's taking responsibility for a murder that he just committed.
Yeah.
Multiple murders.
Kind of brazen.
He believes. He's telling them what kind of gun he used, but he's also taking credit for a murder that happened the previous year. Mike had been shot in the jaw, shoulder, and leg. Darlene was also shot multiple times and died on arrival at the hospital. But Mike was able to describe the killer. He said he was short, about 5'8", heavy set, but not blubbery fat. He was at least 195 pounds and had a large face. He wore dark clothing. Mike did not see him wearing glasses, as is commonly depicted in the sketches of the Zodiac.
Large face.
So 5'8", heavy set, but not blubbery fat. What do you make of that?
Like stocky?
Yeah, like there are people who are big,
Yeah,
but they carry all of that.
that's true.
And maybe sometimes some of that is muscle, but obviously they're heavier.
There's just not that loose fat. It's tight fat.
I don't know if those are medical terms, but I think I get what you're saying.
It's what me and Doogie called it back in the day.
Yeah, okay. And as I kind of talked about earlier, there was some speculation that Darlene knew the killer. According to Oxygen, Mike said the suspect was a friend of Darlene's named Richard. And Darlene's sister claimed one of her boyfriends was a journalist named Richard. A future episode of America's Most Wanted later showed a photo of Farron and a man who resembles the Zodiac composite sketch. Obviously, came much later, right? America's Most Wanted didn't start until, the 80s?
Oh, yeah.
Or something like that. It's possible she was acquainted with the killer through her work at Terry's restaurant. The Sacramento Bee also reported that although she was married, Darlene was dating at least one police officer. And this idea that, some of the victims thought the Zodiac was a police officer, right? That comes up quite a bit. You pull up behind somebody, you get out with a flashlight. Okay, that's something a police officer would have done.
Sure.
Additionally, according to the book, This is the Zodiac Speaking by Michael Kelleher, Darlene knew victims Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. Darlene lived less than 2 blocks from Betty and attended Hogan High School. She also knew that Lake Herman Road was a lover's lane.
So some tie-ins.
Yeah, definitely possible tie-ins. I think, what does it mean, though? Does it mean that the killer was someone who knew all the victims because it seemed like some of them knew each other?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Darlene's sister, Pam Huckabee, told the San Francisco Daily Democrat that she believed she missed seeing her sister's killer by seconds. She was in the parking lot and was leaving when the car drove up behind her sister. Huckabee said, "The police car passed me. Going in as we were going out, we heard the pop pop, but thought it was fireworks."
The police car.
Which is interesting. So was it a real police car or was it a car that was a similar model to what police drove back then?
Yeah, I think that's what she meant.
Now, the fireworks angle is interesting because this does happen on, the 4th of July. There was fireworks going on all over the place. On a normal night, you hear the pop pop, you probably don't think fireworks. But on the 4th, you would.
Yeah, or anytime near the 4th, right? Because people let fireworks off.
A little bit before, a little after. Maybe they're too anxious, they can't wait, and then maybe they have some left over.
Right.
You don't want to keep them until next year. The first of the infamous Zodiac letters was postmarked July 31st, 1969. 3 virtually identical letters were sent to the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. The message started with, "Dear Editor, I am the killer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman." The writer claimed responsibility for the 2 shootings and provided details about the victims, weapons, number of shots fired, and the brand of ammunition. The writer threatened to go on a kill rampage if the letters weren't printed on the front page of the papers by August 1st. And each letter ended with a symbol of a circle with a cross through it, which became the symbol of the Zodiac Killer.
I'm thinking these letters got their attention right away.
Very quickly. Because it's one thing to take credit for a murder or multiple murders. It's another thing to provide verifiable details that maybe have not been released to the public. Also, this symbol has become, pretty infamous. It's also the exact symbol on my Zodiac watch.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Each letter was accompanied by one part of a 3-part cipher. The writer claimed, "In this cipher is my identity." The first cipher was the longest ever sent, containing 408 characters. It's commonly referred to as Z408. On August 4th, the San Francisco Examiner received a 3-page letter in response to the police asking for information to prove the writer actually committed the murders. The letter opened with, "Dear Editor, this is the Zodiac speaking." And that to me is a little bit scary just on its own.
Right.
To think about that. This is the Zodiac speaking.
It's kind of become a famous
tagline.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The sender wrote in detail about how he shot Michael Mageau and even described the golf course caretaker. When writing about the Lake Herman murders, he wrote that he taped the flashlight to his gun to aim easily in the dark. And we're not reading all of these letters word for word. Some of them are, quite long. The sender also referred to the Z408 cipher, writing, "By the way, are the police having a good time with the code? If not, tell them to cheer up. When they do crack it, they will have me." So, the ciphers are a big part of the Zodiac case, right? This one, he's indicating, if you're able to solve this cipher, you will have my true identity, which the police have to be giddy about because, okay, once we know who you are, we're coming to get you.
Yeah. We got good people. We'll figure this out.
Within a week, North Salinas high school teacher Donald Hardin and his wife Betty solved the Z408 cipher. The full message said, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise and all that I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collection of slaves for my afterlife." And you just mentioned it, Gibbs. You think about all of the people who probably worked on this cipher, including, maybe people within the government, the defense, code breakers, all of that. And it turns out that a teacher and his wife solved it.
Yeah.
And according to the History Channel, it was actually Betty who solved the cipher by identifying 2 cribs which are words or phrases suspected to appear in the message. Betty guessed that the killer wanted attention, so she assumed the message should begin with the word I. She also believed the word kill or killing or the phrase I like killing would appear in the message. She was correct.
And then just kind of work yourself backwards from there, right?
Yeah, well, you get KILL. You fill in all the K's, the I's, the L's, and you just go from there.
It's like that one time I solved that Sputnik message.
Is that the same as Sputnik, the Russian satellite?
It's similar. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's the sister of that.
just checking. I didn't know there was a message, but again, I was not involved in all the classified stuff you were, but it is so very interesting that, who needs the FBI, the CIA, the, armed forces code breakers or whoever it is, these people sitting down drinking their coffee.
Yeah.
Solved this thing.
How cool is that?
The next definitive Zodiac attack occurred on September 27th, 1969 at Lake Berryessa in Napa County. 22-year-old Cecilia Shepard and 20-year-old Brian Hartnell decided to have a spontaneous picnic at Twin Oak Ridge, a peninsula on the western shore of the lake. A man approached around 6 p.m. He was 5'8" to 6 foot tall. He had dark hair and was heavyset. He was wearing a dark jacket and dark clothing that appeared disheveled. He had on glasses. It was Cecilia who first spotted the man. Brian thought that he looked to be in his 30s and called him fairly unremarkable. The man ducked behind a tree, put on a hood, and then emerged about 20 feet away from the couple. His hood was black and had a bib that fell almost to his waist with a cross-circle design embroidered on it like the one that appeared in the Zodiac letters. Holes were cut out for the eyes and mouth, and he had clip-on sunglasses. Okay, I don't know about you, but if I'm on a picnic with my lady friends, and we're out at the lake, not a care in the world, and I look over, and this dude pops out from behind a tree, I'm going to need a new pair of underwear. I'm just telling you.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
You've seen sketches of what Brian Hartnell described. It's not something you expect to see at the lake.
No.
Okay. Maybe girls in swimwear, guys wearing swim trunks, not hooded figures.
No.
With cutout eye holes and all in black with a strange symbol on the front. Brian thought he could see brown hair through the holes in the mask. The man had a long knife on his person, and he was holding a large semi-automatic pistol, which he aimed at the couple. So, if you didn't mess your drawers when you first saw him, I think the knife and him holding a gun on you is, it's going to cause some loosening of the bowels.
Potentially. He said,
I want your money and your car keys. I want your car to go to Mexico. Brian gave him his keys. He gave him, all the change he had. The man took the coins and dropped the keys on the picnic blanket, then holstered his weapon. Brian tried to placate the man by offering his help, but the man said, no, time's running short. He claimed he was an escaped inmate from the Pacific Northwest region and had killed a prison guard. He said he had a stolen car and nothing to lose, that he was flat broke. Brian couldn't remember the exact town he said he came from. Some sources say Deer Lodge, Montana, but other sources say he came from Colorado. Brian recalled that the city had some double name, like Fern Lock or something like that. An interviewer suggested the word lodge, and Brian agreed that could be it. Deer Lodge was then suggested, and Brian said that could be it, I guess. Authorities learned there had been no recent prison escapes in that area. Brian also couldn't hear any particular accent. When the man spoke to him, he He tried to keep talking to convince him not to harm them. They talked about his car for a few minutes before the man removed a clothesline from his belt and ordered Cecilia to tie Brian up. Brian balked, and the man shouted, "Get down right now." Cecilia began tying up Brian and took out her wallet and tossed it to the man. When she was done, the man tied her up and tightened the knots she used on Brian. Brian would later say that he noticed the man's hands were shaking. He said, "I'm going to have to stab you people." Brian responded, "I couldn't stand to see her stabbed. Stab me first." And then the killer said, "I'll do just that." Brian was stabbed 6 times and Cecilia was stabbed 10 times. And then the attacker left them for dead. And again, all these incidents are horrific. I think when you try to put yourself in the position of these people, it's tough, but you get a sense of how scary it must have been.
Oh, it had to be like so scary.
First of all, seeing this guy dressed the way he was, then seeing him with the knife pointing a gun at you, and then you're getting tied up. And then from there, what's going to happen? Once you're tied up, your options are much more limited.
And I think you're probably thinking worst case, right?
Yeah, especially when the guy says, I'm going to have to stab you. So Brian gets stabbed 6 times. Cecilia has to see that.
Right. And think that it's coming to her next.
And it does. She gets stabbed 10 times. Brian has to watch that.
And hear the scream.
And hear the screaming and all that. Just horrible for both of them. But you do have to wonder, why is Brian stabbed 6 times and Cecilia stabbed 10 times?
Well, either he thought he did what he had to
kill Brian.
Yeah. Or maybe he just really has a dislike for women.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was headed. If you think about the earlier murders that we talked about, Darlene Ferrin dies, but Michael Mageau lived.
Yeah.
Now, he does go back to shoot him a couple more times, but he still lives to tell police about, what happened that night.
As his real victim was probably her, because maybe she scorned him at some point.
Or he just, like you said, has a real disdain for women.
Right.
Brian described the weapon as a foot-long double-edged knife with wooden handle slabs, true brass rivets, and white tape where the guard would normally be. The man then walked to Brian's car and drew the Zodiac symbol on the door with the following message: Vallejo, 12/20/68, 7/4/69, September 27th, 69, 6:30 by knife. But for some reason, he didn't put the E on the end of knife. So it's more like NIF.
Yeah.
California Department of Justice documents examiner Sherwood Morrill concluded the door message was written by the author of the Zodiac letters. And I said it earlier, right? But this Sherwood Morrill is really a central figure in the Zodiac case. Because there's so much handwriting, because there's so much communication, this guy has a lot of documents to look over and compare.
Kind of an expert at it.
And he is considered to be an expert. Now, his expertise and his findings, I think, come into question at some point. At 7:40 p.m., a man called the Napa County Sheriff's Department and said, "I want to report a murder." No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. The operator asked where he was calling from. He said, "I'm the one that did it," then dropped the receiver instead of hanging up. The call was traced to a car wash in Napa, and a palm print was taken from the phone that has never been matched to anyone.
Amazing.
According to Robert Graysmith, author of the 1986 book Zodiac, Brian untied Cecilia's ropes with his teeth, and she freed them. A fisherman and his son were in the area and heard their screams. They went to get help, and 2 park rangers stayed with the couple until an ambulance arrived. Cecilia was still conscious when the police arrived, and gave a description of the attacker, Napa County Deputy Sheriff Dave Collins recalled to the Napa Valley Register she was conscious but going in and out of shock. She was in terrific pain. She kept asking me for something for the pain, but I didn't have anything to give her. She was cold and shivering. I got my uniform jacket from my car, wrapped it around her, then wrapped her in a blanket. I held her. She was very frightened and kept pleading with me not to leave her.
And I was thinking how scared they had to be, thinking he was going to come back at any time, and that you probably didn't feel safe until the police arrived.
Yeah, I get that. Is he going to come back? Is he going to, stab us some more? And, maybe they felt safe, but it obviously doesn't sound like Cecilia's doing great. She is able to give a description of the attacker, which is amazing. She's been stabbed 10 times and she's in, terrible pain. And you feel for this Deputy Sheriff Dave Collins, like he's trying to do whatever he can do, but he doesn't have morphine or anything that would, lessen her pain. All he can do is wrap her up in something warmer to keep her from shivering. Cecilia fell into a coma during transport and never regained consciousness. She died 2 days later. Brian Hartnell survived and told his story to the press. He told the Napa Valley Register, "I refused to die. He had too much to live for." He said, "I just wasn't ready to die. I wasn't satisfied with my personal life and decided this was no way to end it." And yeah, I get it. There is something as far as the will to live. But I go back to how many stab wounds Brian received versus how many Cecilia received. And it just seems like it would be the other way around.
Sure.
Right? Brian is the bigger threat.
Why not take him down?
With more stab wounds.
Yeah.
And in the back of my mind, the only reason I can come up with is a hatred for women. Earlier that day, several people saw a suspicious man around the lake. A man and his son saw a heavy-set man watching them before he hurried off. And how many times have we heard the description of a heavy-set man?
Yeah. This is another one of those times, but not like fat. They're not saying they're saying heavy-set, right?
Yeah, but heavy-set can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I think the other person was pretty specific. Heavy-set, but not in a blubbery type way.
Right.
Just made it sound like he was more stocky. Heavy, but stocky. Maybe even a little muscular, but you wouldn't see it because he's a big guy. Does that make sense?
It does.
Around 2:50 p.m., 3 women saw a stranger driving a light blue 2-door Chevy with California plates, most likely a 1966 model. He pulled up, drove forward, then backed up, so he was parked right next to them. He looked down like he was pretending to read. Half an hour later, the women were sunbathing on the lake shore, and they saw the same man watching them. He was clean cut and nice looking, 6 foot tall, around 200 pounds, with short dark hair parted on the side. He wore a black short-sleeved sweatshirt over a t-shirt with dark blue or black slacks. Their description was pretty similar to the 2 victims. Apparently, he watched them for about 20 minutes while smoking and then walked off. His vehicle was gone when they returned to his car.
I mean, so we got a guy, 5'8", 6 foot tall,
a couple hundred pounds. Now, the word heavy-set has been used a lot. This one I thought was a little different, right? Clean cut and nice looking.
Yeah.
6 foot tall, 200 pounds doesn't necessarily mean heavy-set.
No, it just sounds maybe like proportioned.
Could be.
Yeah.
It could be. It depends on the person, but nice looking. So is this the same person, or is this just somebody completely different who maybe was enamored with these women in their bathing suits and, taking in the sights of the beach? I don't know.
And unrelated to any of this.
And completely unrelated. But these women worked with Napa Valley Register photographer Robert McKenzie to create a composite sketch. And a composite sketch would be very useful if this man was the killer. If he's just somebody, sitting at the beach, smoking, leering at women in their bathing suits, then it's not going to do a whole lot of good. But
and could it do harm?
It could. It could send police off in the wrong direction, looking for somebody that is ultimately not really the killer.
Yeah.
But I guess you'd rather have it than not have it.
And hoping that you would find this person and then
be able to rule them out.
Right.
Or I kind of think that about most things. In a case, you'd rather know about it or have the information than not. At least you got something to work with. Now, hopefully it doesn't lead you down a rabbit hole that completely takes you away from the right person.
Right.
But if you don't get info, that's what we talk about in a lot of Unsolved, right? At a certain point, the police stop getting information. And what in the heck are they supposed to work with?
It's true.
And that's why a lot of cases go unsolved, and it's 30, 40, 50 years later, and we're still talking about them. Because either somebody failed to come forward, or nobody saw the person, or there just is no information to work with.
Remember that sketch of that one potential suspect that we had in our office? And every time you would go into the bathroom and look in the mirror, you saw what a lot of people thought was you.
Oh, is that the one where somebody had drawn the fake mustache on the mirror in the bathroom? Yeah. It was a rough week. But as we wrap up this first episode, no doubt about it, when you look at these attacks that are attributed to Zodiac, they're pretty brutal. They're shootings. In this latest one, he had the gun but didn't use it. He stabbed his victims repeatedly after tying them up.
It's also how he approaches his victims, how he locates them and then approaches them.
Yeah, you can look at it and see similarities, but also see differences, right? We're talking about attacks on lovers' lanes, which are dark. But in this latest one at Lake Berryessa, it's like broad daylight.
Yeah.
And he's walking around in what appears to be some kind of Halloween costume.
Well, that's true. There's a big black bib in the front.
Yeah. A mask with, eye holes cut out. Now, I get it. It's probably remote. He scouted it out. He doesn't see anybody else, but still.
Pretty confident, though.
There's a chance he could be seen, but he is wearing a disguise. So.
Yeah.
But I think, that kind of proves the point that, when you're talking about serial killers, a lot of times people say, well, they have an MO. And that's true. A lot of them do. It doesn't mean that they have to kill every time the exact same way.
No.
People sometimes change it up. He used a gun and he used a knife. It doesn't mean it's not the same person just because the method of murder was, different. I think the thing for me that really comes across as we talk about these crimes is the scare factor. Take away the fact that some of these people died. They had to have been scared to death
right
at the time. And even the people who lived, they were lucky to live. They had to be scared. But I'm thinking about the larger population. This stuff starts to come out. How could you not be scared to go to a lover's lane?
The panic that rolls out from this.
Yeah. And now all of a sudden you have this attack at the lake and you're like, okay, it's not just lover's lanes that we have to worry about. This guy could strike anywhere. So to me, that is very scary. In part 2 of the Zodiac Killer episodes, we'll cover the last confirmed Zodiac murder, more of the killer's correspondence with newspapers, and some additional suspected Zodiac cases. Then in part 3, we're going to really dive into suspects that have emerged over the years and talk more about the efforts of those who have solved, some of the various ciphers. So there's a lot more to cover.
There is.
As it relates to the Zodiac. But that's it for our first part on the Zodiac. We got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Let's hear them.
Hi, this is Lenora calling from Port Townsend, Washington. And I've been really enjoying TCAT Unsolved, working my way through that. And once I get caught up, I'm going to move over to True Crime All the Time. So I just wanted to thank you for your podcast and your attention to detail, finding it very interesting. And I have a suggestion. This is a fairly unknown case. It's in Port Townsend, and it is a potential serial killer named Glenn Bagley, Bagley. This is back in the 1970s, and he's likely responsible for a couple of disappearances, a mother and son in Port Townsend, and his ex-wife over in Seattle area. So very interesting, and happened to be my grandparents' neighbor when I was growing up. And my grandpa happened to spend a lot of time with him, and I have a few little stories. So it was very interesting to find out later on that he was probably somebody who was responsible for that. Anyhow, thank you again. Keep your own time ticking.
All right. Thank you very much. And we'll definitely look into that. It would be on TCAT, I think, but put it on the list.
Well, I used to complain about y'all not putting out more episodes because I was all caught up and getting bored and stuff like that. So I've been listening to trials on TV. Like, I've been kind of obsessing about that. So instead of listening to you guys, I feel like I've been cheating on y'all, but I haven't been listening to another podcast. But so I have quite a few to catch up on. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I don't even know why I called, but I missed you guys. So I'm going back to you. We just had a trial separation, but now I'm coming back. If you'll have me.
Well, we were wondering if you were cheating on us.
Yeah, and we'll always have you.
Yeah.
Although we didn't know we didn't have you.
Now we know.
Now we know.
So what do we do with that? I don't know.
I always like it when she says, I don't even know why I called.
Yeah, I don't even know why I'm calling you guys.
It cracks me up.
You know why.
You know why. All right, buddy. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. We're coming back next week with part 2.
That's right.
On Zodiac. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
Pluto TV is the place for movie fans like me.
And TV fans like me.
They've got something for everyone, and it's totally free.
You can binge laugh-out-loud sitcoms like Frasier.
And rewatch cult classics like Higher Learning.
Whether you're in the mood to solve a little crime before bedtime with NCIS or Tracker.
Or curl up with a surefire hit like Forrest Gump.
Run, Forrest! Pluto TV has thousands of movies and shows, all for free.
Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.